Most people will spend their entire lives chasing happiness, security, and purpose, only to discover that every achievement leaves another emptiness waiting to be filled. Stress replaces peace. Success replaces meaning. Endless information replaces true wisdom. They spend their entire lives searching for peace in a world that was never designed to give it to them. Yet, thousands of years ago, long before the modern world taught humanity to compete, consume, and constantly compare, ancient sages warned that this would happen. They believed the greatest prison is never built from iron or stone. It's built inside the human mind. For the greatest loss was never wealth, power, or status. It was forgetfulness. Today, millions wake before sunrise burdened by anxiety, work harder than ever yet feel emptier than ever, and chase success, only to discover that achievement cannot silence a restless mind. Families grow more connected through technology, but increasingly disconnected in spirit. Wisdom has become information, and knowledge has become noise. Yet thousands of years ago, long before modern civilization, the guardians of ancient mystery schools preserved a teaching they believed could free humanity from this invisible suffering. It was called the Law of One, a timeless philosophy that teaches that every fear born from separation can dissolve when we remember our true relationship with creation. Throughout this journey, you will uncover why humanity forgot this sacred truth, how the hidden law of creation quietly shapes every life, and why awakening is not about becoming someone new. It is about remembering who you have always been. Chapter 1. Awakening the Creator Within. Awakening is rarely about becoming someone new. More often, it is about uncovering what has always existed beneath fear, distraction, pride, and forgetfulness. Ancient wisdom traditions repeatedly describe the human spirit as possessing an inner creative power, not the power to control the universe, but the power to shape one's character, perception, and response to life. Every civilization expressed this mystery differently. Hermetic philosophers spoke of the divine mind reflected within humanity. Greek philosophers encouraged relentless self-examination. Stoics taught mastery over one's inner kingdom. The great teachers agreed that before a person can shape the world wisely, they must first learn to shape themselves. The Creator within is not awakened through force. It awakens through refinement. Like the sculptor removing excess stone, each day invites us to remove another layer that hides our deeper nature. The first practice is observation. Most people move through life without truly observing themselves. Thoughts arise, emotions appear, habits repeat, and years pass unnoticed. Ancient initiates understood that observation itself possesses transformative power. The moment anger is honestly observed, it begins to lose its unconscious grip. The moment fear is recognized without judgment, it no longer secretly governs every decision. Observation creates distance. Distant creates freedom. A person who cannot observe themselves becomes a servant of impulse. One who can observe quietly begins to recover authorship over their own life. The second practice is silence. Modern civilization often mistakes silence for emptiness. Ancient wisdom regarded silence as one of humanity's richest teachers. The loudest mind rarely hears its deepest truth. The Desert Fathers withdrew into barren landscapes not because they hated humanity, but because they wished to hear what constant noise prevented them from hearing. In silence, they discovered that beneath endless mental conversation existed another voice, calm, patient, and remarkably clear. Silence does not remove problems. It allows wisdom to become audible. The third practice is meditation. Across civilizations, meditation was never merely relaxation. It was disciplined attention directed toward reality itself. Whether a Stoic reflected upon impermanence, a Buddhist observed the movement of thought, or a Hermetic initiate contemplated the harmony of creation, the purpose remained similar: to know the mind by watching it rather than obeying it. A restless mind believes every thought. A disciplined mind questions them. This difference quietly transforms an entire life. The fourth practice is gratitude. Many imagine gratitude to be simple politeness, yet ancient philosophers considered it an act of profound perception. Gratitude changes what the mind notices. A fearful mind scans constantly for danger. A grateful mind begins recognizing opportunity, kindness, beauty, and unexpected abundance already present. Nothing external may change immediately, yet perception changes first, and perception gradually influences every decision that follows. Gratitude softens the heart without weakening it. The fifth practice is service. Creation reaches its highest expression when it blesses more than the Creator. Ancient teachers repeatedly warned that spiritual growth pursued solely for personal superiority eventually becomes another form of ego. True awakening naturally overflows into generosity. Service need not be grand. Listening patiently, teaching honestly, working skillfully, forgiving sincerely, encouraging another soul. These quiet acts participate in creation because they strengthen the invisible fabric connecting humanity. The Creator within matures through contribution. The sixth practice is self-inquiry. Socrates famously insisted that the unexamined life is not worth living. His statement was neither harsh nor pessimistic. It was an invitation. Ask yourself, why does this criticism wound me? What fear lies beneath this ambition? What am I truly seeking? What remains if every title disappears? Questions such as these become chisels shaping consciousness. Each honest answer removes another fragment of illusion. Slowly, the hidden statue begins to emerge. The seventh practice is disciplined attention. Attention is among humanity's greatest creative powers because whatever repeatedly receives attention gradually expands within experience. Ancient monks guarded attention as carefully as kings guarded treasure. They knew scattered attention produces scattered living. Focused attention produces purposeful living. The person constantly distracted by comparison, resentment, fear, and endless stimulation slowly becomes shaped by these forces. The person who deliberately returns attention toward truth, compassion, wisdom, and meaningful work quietly reshapes their inner world. Attention becomes destiny. These 7 practices appear simple, yet simplicity has always been the disguise of profound wisdom. Human beings often seek extraordinary revelations while overlooking ordinary disciplines practiced consistently. A mountain is climbed one step at a time. Character is built one decision at a time. Awakening unfolds one moment of awareness at a time. Ancient storytellers preserved a tale of a renowned sculptor whose masterpieces filled temples throughout the kingdom. Pilgrims believed he possessed supernatural talent. Young artists traveled great distances hoping he would reveal his secret technique. When they finally gathered around him, they expected complicated instruction. Instead, the old sculptor led them before a massive block of marble. "What do you see?" he asked. "A stone," they replied. He smiled. "I see a guardian waiting to be uncovered." For months they watched him work. Each day he removed only a few fragments. Sometimes he spent hours simply looking without striking the stone at all, growing impatient. One apprentice finally asked why progress seemed so slow. The master gently placed the chisel into the young man's hand. "You think I am shaping the statue," he said. "I am really learning what does not belong." Years later, after the sculptor had died, his greatest work stood at the entrance of the temple. Visitors admired its beauty, but few understood the lesson hidden within it. Every masterpiece begins as something already complete beneath unnecessary stone. So does every awakened human life. Chapter 2. The 7 Principles of Creation. Every ancient civilization that sought to understand existence eventually arrived at a similar realization. Creation is not merely something that happened long ago. It is happening now. Every thought, every choice, every word, and every act participates in the ongoing unfolding of reality. The stars continue their silent dance, rivers continue carving valleys, forests continue renewing themselves, and within every human being another kind of creation quietly takes place. The shaping of character, perception, and destiny. The wisest teachers never described creation as a single event. They described it as a living relationship between consciousness and action. To create wisely was not simply to build cities or accumulate wealth. It was to cultivate a life so deeply aligned with truth that every decision naturally produced harmony instead of chaos. Across Hermetic philosophy, Greek wisdom, Stoicism, and many ancient traditions, this understanding appears again and again under different names. Though their languages differed, the path remained remarkably similar. It may be understood through 7 timeless principles that every human being can practice regardless of culture, age, or circumstance. The first principle is awareness. Before anything meaningful can change, it must first be seen. A person asleep cannot awaken by dreaming they are awake. Likewise, one who never observes their own thoughts continues to be directed by habits they mistake for personality. Ancient philosophers insisted that awareness is the first act of creation because whatever remains unconscious eventually governs life from the shadows. Socrates encouraged his students to examine themselves relentlessly. Hermetic teachers urged initiates to observe the movements of their own minds before attempting to understand the heavens. The purpose was not self-criticism, but clear seeing. When you notice fear before it becomes anger, pride before it becomes cruelty, or desire before it becomes obsession, you recover the freedom to choose. Awareness turns reaction into wisdom. The second principle is intention. Every structure begins with a design invisible to the eye. Before a temple rises from stone, it first exists within the imagination of its architect. Before a kingdom is governed wisely, it is envisioned by a ruler who sees beyond immediate gain. Likewise, every human life quietly follows the intentions repeatedly held within the heart. Many people confuse wishes with intention. Wishes drift with changing moods. Intention quietly organizes thought, emotion, and action toward a chosen direction. Ancient teachers believed that a divided mind creates divided results, while a unified intention gathers scattered energy into purposeful movement. One clear purpose often accomplishes what countless restless ambitions never can. The third principle is harmony. Nature rarely rushes, yet nothing essential is left undone. Day yields to night without conflict. The seasons surrender to one another without resistance. Oceans rise and fall according to rhythms older than civilization itself. Ancient wisdom invited humanity to imitate this quiet intelligence. Harmony does not demand a life free from difficulty. It asks only that we stop waging unnecessary war against reality. The individual who fights every inconvenience exhausts themselves long before reaching their destination. The one who learns when to act and when to yield possesses a strength invisible to those driven only by force. The greatest creators cooperate with reality before attempting to reshape it. The fourth principle is responsibility. Many ancient traditions taught that true freedom begins precisely where blame ends. So long as every disappointment belongs to fate, society, or other people, the individual remains powerless to change. Responsibility is not accepting guilt for everything that happens. It is accepting ownership for how one chooses to respond. This understanding transformed ordinary people into extraordinary leaders throughout history. They stopped asking, "Who caused this?" and began asking, "What can I create now?" That single question changes destiny. The fifth principle is transformation. Nothing living remains unchanged. Seeds become forests. Clay becomes pottery. Iron becomes a sword only after enduring fire. Ancient alchemists used metals to symbolize an even deeper truth. The greatest transformation occurs within human consciousness. Pain itself is not sacred, but suffering that becomes wisdom is among life's greatest teachers. Fear may become courage. Failure may become humility. Loss may become compassion. The person who refuses transformation remains trapped inside yesterday's identity. The one who embraces it discovers that every ending secretly prepares another beginning. The sixth principle is service. Modern culture often celebrates personal achievement above all else, but ancient wisdom consistently reversed this order. The individual who seeks only personal gain eventually becomes isolated by it. The one who serves life becomes part of something larger than themselves. Service does not always appear dramatic. A craftsman who creates honestly serves. A teacher who awakens curiosity serves. A parent who patiently raises a child serves. A stranger who offers kindness where bitterness was expected serves. Creation reaches its highest expression when it benefits more than its creator. Paradoxically, those who contribute the most often discover the deepest fulfillment, because meaning grows wherever genuine service is offered. The seventh and final principle is unity. This is the crown upon which every previous principle rests. Ancient sages repeatedly declared that beneath apparent diversity exists an underlying wholeness connecting all existence. Whether described as the One, the Logos, divine mind, or simply the living order of creation, they believed separation is ultimately less fundamental than relationship. To live in unity does not require abandoning individuality. Rather, it means recognizing that every action ripples beyond the self. Every word influences another mind. Every kindness strengthens unseen networks of trust. Every cruelty echoes farther than intended. The awakened person gradually understands that creating a better life and contributing to a better world are no longer separate pursuits. The two become one. An old story from ancient Egypt tells of a master architect chosen to build a sanctuary, unlike any before it. Young apprentices believed the greatness of the temple depended upon enormous stones and perfect measurements. Yet before construction began, the master spent weeks sitting quietly beside the river, saying almost nothing. Growing impatient, one apprentice finally asked why they were wasting precious time. The old architect smiled. "If we build before we become worthy of what we build, he replied. "The walls will stand, but the sanctuary will remain empty." Only then did he explain that every lasting creation begins long before hands touch stone. It begins in awareness, is directed by intention, sustained through harmony, protected by responsibility, refined through transformation, offered through service, and completed in unity. The temple they eventually raised survived for generations. Yet the oldest records say its greatest achievement was never the building itself. It was the people who became different while creating it. Chapter 3. Why humanity forgot its true nature. The birth of the separate self. If humanity possesses such remarkable potential, why do so few seem to live from it? This question has echoed through mystery schools, monasteries, philosophical academies, and desert caves for thousands of years. The answer offered by many ancient traditions is both simple and unsettling. People do not fail because they lack wisdom. They fail because they gradually forget who they are. No child enters the world believing themselves inadequate. The newborn knows nothing of status, comparison, success, or failure. Before language forms, before social roles emerge, life is experienced directly. There is curiosity instead of judgment, presence instead of anxiety, wonder instead of constant evaluation. Then, almost unnoticed, another identity begins to form. Packrents teach names, society teaches roles, schools teach competition, cultures teach belonging through conformity. Much of this education is necessary. Civilization depends upon cooperation and shared understanding. Yet, alongside practical learning, another lesson quietly develops. The belief that our value depends entirely upon external approval. Thus, the separate self is born. Ancient teachers did not condemn the ego. They understood it as a useful servant for navigating daily life. The danger arises only when the servant quietly declares itself the master. The ego constantly asks questions the deeper self never needed to ask. Am I enough? Am I admired? Am I winning? Am I safer than others? Fear becomes the engine driving identity. The child who once explored freely begins protecting an image. Soon reputation matters more than authenticity. Comparison replaces curiosity. Achievement replaces meaning. Possession replaces contentment. Noise replaces silence. What began as protection slowly becomes imprisonment. Hermetic wisdom spoke of humanity forgetting its divine origin, not because truth disappeared, but because attention became completely absorbed by appearances. The ancient philosophers reminded students that a person staring only at reflections eventually mistakes the reflection for reality itself. This forgetting did not happen in a single generation. It unfolded across centuries as civilizations grew increasingly occupied with survival, conflict, wealth, power, and recognition. These pursuits are not inherently wrong. The problem begins when they become substitutes for self-knowledge. Fear strengthens this forgetting. A frightened mind narrows its vision. Survival becomes its only concern. Creativity declines. Compassion weakens. The individual who constantly fears losing status, possessions, or certainty eventually builds an entire identity around defending what was never permanent. The ancient Stoics observed this repeatedly. They noticed that external circumstances often enslaved those who believed happiness depended upon controlling everything outside themselves. Freedom, they insisted, begins when one's inner life no longer rises and falls with every changing event. The return to wisdom therefore begins in an unexpected place, not by becoming someone greater, but by remembering someone deeper, Self-knowledge is not the accumulation of information. It is the gradual removal of illusion. Like an old mirror covered by decades of dust, the human spirit rarely needs replacing. It needs uncovering. Each fear honestly examined removes another layer. Each attachment consciously released restores another fragment of clarity. Each moment of silence allows forgotten wisdom to surface again. Ancient tradition tells of a young seeker who traveled across deserts, searching for the greatest sage in the known world. After many months, he finally reached a mountain sanctuary where an elderly teacher welcomed him warmly. The traveler eagerly asked for the secret that would awaken his true nature. The old master handed him a polished bronze mirror. Confused, the young man waited for further instruction. "There is nothing written upon it," he protested. "There never was," the master replied. "The wisdom you seek was never hidden inside books. It has always waited beneath everything you mistakenly believed yourself to be." For 40 days, the seeker remained on the mountain. He learned no complicated rituals, no mysterious formulas, no hidden language. Instead, he observed his thoughts, questioned his fears, served the community, embraced silence, and watched the sunrise each morning without seeking to possess it. When he finally descended the mountain, those who knew him noticed something remarkable. His face had not changed. His voice remained the same. Yet everyone sensed a quiet presence that had not existed before. The greatest transformation had occurred where no eye could see. He had remembered what civilization had taught him to forget, and in remembering himself, he no longer experienced the world as separate from the source of life itself. Chapter 4. The Prison of Labels. There is an ancient saying attributed to the wisdom traditions of many civilizations. The name of a thing is not the thing itself. A map is not the land it represents. A title is not the person who carries it. A reputation is not the soul that silently lives beneath it. Yet from childhood, humanity learns to mistake labels for identity. One child is called intelligent, another is called ordinary. One becomes successful, another becomes unsuccessful. One is praised as wealthy, another is pitied as poor. Over time, these descriptions cease to be temporary observations. They become invisible prisons. The words spoken by others slowly become the words we speak to ourselves, until we forget there was ever a self before the labels were attached. The ancient philosophers understood this danger long before psychology gave it a name. They observed that the greatest chains are rarely made of iron. They are forged from beliefs accepted without examination. A man may spend his entire life introducing himself by his profession and never discover who he is without it. A woman may build her worth upon admiration and never learn whether she is lovable apart from applause. Another may carry the burden of a single failure for decades, allowing one painful chapter to become the title of an entire life. The label quietly replaces the living person. The Stoics repeatedly warned against this confusion. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that emperorship was merely a role entrusted for a season. Epictetus, who had once lived as a slave, refused to allow either slavery or freedom to define his essence. Both men understood a profound truth. Circumstances describe where you stand, not who you are. This distinction changes everything. Imagine an actor performing on a grand stage. One evening he plays a king clothed in gold. The following night he portrays a beggar clothed in rags. If he mistakes either costume for his real identity, he suffers unnecessarily. The audience applauds or criticizes the performance. yet the actor remains unchanged beneath every disguise. Life often resembles such a theater. Success is a costume, failure is another. Youth is a costume, old age is another. Fame arrives like borrowed clothing, obscurity does the same. The awakened person learns to wear every role without becoming imprisoned by it. Ancient Hermetic teachers encouraged their students to observe these changing identities as one watches clouds passing across the sky. The clouds appear, transform and disappear, yet the sky itself remains untouched. Consciousness, they taught, possesses the same quiet permanence. Most suffering begins when we mistake passing clouds for the whole heavens. Modern life continually encourages identification with external measurements. We are asked where we work, how much we earn, how many followers we possess, what titles appear beside our names, what neighborhoods we inhabit, and what achievements decorate our biographies. Rarely are we asked questions that reach deeper. What brings your soul alive? What truth have you discovered through suffering? What kindness has shaped your character? What wisdom would remain if everything else vanished? Ancient sages considered these the questions that revealed the real human being. Psychologically, labels offer comfort because they simplify uncertainty. They create the illusion that people can be understood quickly. Yet, simplicity often hides complexity. The person called successful may secretly feel empty. The one called unsuccessful may possess remarkable peace. Wealth may conceal anxiety, while poverty may reveal extraordinary generosity. Appearances rarely tell the whole story. This is why many wisdom traditions encouraged periods of solitude. Away from social expectations, titles gradually lose their power. Silence exposes identities we have borrowed but never truly chosen. Some discover they have lived according to the expectations of parents. Others recognize they have spent decades chasing approval from strangers. Some realize that fear has quietly directed nearly every important decision. Recognition can be painful, yet it is also liberating. Only what is seen can be transformed. The Buddha spoke of attachment as a source of suffering. Many imagine attachment concerns only possessions, but attachment to identity can become even stronger. We cling to being right, respected, admired, indispensable, or superior. Whenever these identities are threatened, anxiety immediately follows. The wise, therefore, practice holding identity lightly, not because life lacks meaning, but because meaning grows deeper than every label. The most extraordinary individuals in history often displayed remarkable freedom from external identity. Socrates accepted condemnation rather than betray his conscience. Diogenes abandoned comfort to preserve independence. Countless anonymous monks, philosophers, healers, and artisans quietly served generations without seeking recognition. Their influence endured because it was rooted in character rather than reputation. Character outlives titles. One of the oldest stories preserved in the traditions of the Eastern Mediterranean tells of a wealthy merchant whose ships crossed every known sea. His name was spoken with admiration wherever trade flourished. He believed his wealth proved his greatness, and he measured every person according to possessions. One violent storm changed everything. Within days, nearly every ship disappeared beneath the waves. His fortune vanished with them. Ashamed, he withdrew from public life, convinced that he himself had become worthless. Months later, while wandering through the countryside, he encountered an elderly potter shaping clay beside a river. Curious, the merchant asked how the old man remained cheerful despite owning almost nothing. The potter smiled without pausing his work. "When this clay becomes a jar," he said, "people call it valuable. If it breaks, they call it useless. Yet before it became a jar, it was clay. After it breaks, it remains clay. Only the name changes." The merchant sat quietly. The old craftsman continued, "You have mistaken the jar for the clay." Those simple words pierced more deeply than any lecture. For the first time, the merchant realized that prosperity had never been his true identity. Poverty could not erase what wealth had never created. His integrity, wisdom, compassion, and capacity to serve remained untouched by the rise and fall of fortune. He returned to rebuilding his life, but no longer to prove his worth. He built because building allowed him to contribute. His peace no longer depended upon the names others gave him. And in losing every label, he finally discovered the one reality that had been waiting beneath them all. Chapter 5. The Great Chain of Being. An old legend tells of a young prince who desired to understand why the ancient masters treated every living creature, from towering cedar trees to tiny ants, with such reverence. Believing greatness belonged only to kings and warriors, he asked an elderly sage why wise men spent so much time studying birds, rivers, stars, and seasons. The old teacher handed him a single thread of woven linen. "Break it," he instructed. The prince snapped it effortlessly. The sage then placed into his hands a thick rope made from thousands of such threads. "Now break this." The prince strained with all his strength. The rope did not move. The master quietly replied, "Creation survives because nothing truly stands alone." This simple lesson reflected one of the oldest philosophical ideas shared across ancient civilizations. Existence is woven together like an immense living tapestry. Every being occupies a place within a greater order. Ancient philosophers later described this vision as the great chain of being. Not merely a hierarchy of importance, but an interconnected web in which every part contributes to the harmony of the whole. The stars influence the seasons. The seasons nourish the forests. The forests protect the rivers. The rivers sustain villages. The villages raise families. The families shape future generations. Nothing exists in isolation. This understanding cultivated profound humility among many ancient teachers. They did not see humanity as separate from creation, but as participants within it. To damage one part of the living order was eventually to weaken another. To care for one part was to strengthen the whole. Modern society often celebrates independence as the highest achievement. Ancient wisdom celebrated interdependence instead. The strongest tree still depends upon unseen roots. The greatest ruler depends upon ordinary farmers. The wisest philosopher depends upon teachers who came before. Even breath itself is borrowed from the forests. Recognizing this truth softens pride. It also deepens responsibility. When individuals imagine themselves completely separate, selfishness appears reasonable. If life is merely a competition among isolated beings, then accumulating more than others seems justified. But once one perceives existence as profoundly interconnected, every action gains wider significance. A harsh word travels farther than expected. A generous act reaches strangers we may never meet. Integrity strengthens communities. Dishonesty quietly weakens them. The ancient world repeatedly illustrated this through nature. A single neglected spring eventually dries an entire valley. One diseased branch can threaten an orchard. Likewise, the health of civilization depends not only upon laws, but upon the unseen character of ordinary people. The philosopher Plotinus described reality as flowing from a single source, much as sunlight radiates from one sun without diminishing its brilliance. Diversity was not viewed as contradiction, but as expression. Every individual reflected the same underlying mystery through a unique form. This vision transforms comparison. The oak need not envy the olive. The eagle need not imitate the deer. The river does not compete with the mountain. Each fulfills its purpose precisely by becoming what it was created to become. Human beings often suffer because they compare their path with someone else's calling. Ancient wisdom gently reminds us that purpose is discovered through faithful expression of one's own nature, not imitation of another's. The great chain of being therefore calls every person to two forms of remembrance. First, remember your significance. Your choices matter. Your presence influences others in ways you may never fully witness. Every act of patience, honesty, courage, or compassion strengthens the invisible fabric of human life. Second, remember your smallness. The universe existed before your arrival and will continue after your departure. This is not cause for despair, but for freedom. You are invited to participate in a story far greater than yourself. Humility and dignity walk together. Neither can survive long without the other. An ancient account tells of an aging gardener employed within the grounds of a great temple. Visitors admired magnificent statues, towering columns, and golden halls, yet few ever noticed the old man quietly tending flowers along the pathways. A young apprentice once asked whether he felt overlooked while others received praise. The gardener smiled. "When pilgrims leave," he said, "they remember the peace they felt here. They rarely remember the flowers, but the flowers helped create the peace." He gently watered another small plant before continuing. The roots beneath the garden never receive applause either. Yet without them, nothing beautiful would remain. Years after the gardener died, travelers still spoke of the unusual serenity surrounding that temple. No monument carried his name. No inscription honored his labor. Yet every blossom blooming there continued the work of hands long forgotten. Such is the quiet wisdom of the great chain of being. Every life possesses purpose. Every act shapes the whole. And the greatest contributions are often those made without seeking recognition, trusting that the unseen foundations of goodness support generations yet to come. Chapter 6. The Illusion of Separation. Imagine standing upon a high mountain just before dawn. Below you, countless villages remain hidden beneath a thick blanket of mist. From where you stand, each valley appears completely isolated. Hills seem divided from one another. Rivers disappear beneath the clouds. Forests look like separate islands floating in white silence. Then the sun slowly rises. The mist begins to dissolve. What moments earlier appeared divided is revealed to have been connected all along. One river links every valley. One forest stretches farther than the eye first imagined. One landscape was never truly broken. Only vision was limited. Ancient philosophers often used similar images to explain one of humanity's deepest misunderstandings: the illusion of separation. The experience feels real, yet appearances are not always ultimate reality. Human beings naturally experience themselves as individuals with unique bodies, memories, personalities, and responsibilities. Ancient wisdom never denied individuality. What it questioned was the belief that individuality means complete isolation. The ego quietly strengthens this illusion. It constantly whispers, I must protect only myself. My success requires another's failure. My suffering belongs only to me. I am separate from everyone else. These assumptions shape behavior more powerfully than most people realize. Fear grows easily where separation dominates perception. Compassion becomes difficult. Comparison becomes constant. Loneliness deepens. The individual begins defending an isolated identity against an entire world. Ancient teachers recognized this pattern thousands of years before modern psychology described similar processes. The ego itself is not evil. It is useful. It organizes experience. It protects the body. It navigates ordinary life. But when the ego becomes the only lens through which reality is interpreted, suffering quietly multiplies. The Stoics reminded students that every human shares the same rational nature. Buddhist philosophy emphasized interdependent existence. Hermetic teachings spoke of one living intelligence expressing itself through countless forms. Though their languages differed, they pointed toward a remarkably similar insight. Life is relationship before it is separation. This truth becomes obvious throughout nature. No tree grows independently. It depends upon soil, rain, sunlight, insects, unseen fungi beneath the earth, and generations of previous forests. No child becomes fully human without countless relationships, shaping language, values, affection, and understanding. Even the breath entering your lungs was created by plants you will never meet. Independence itself depends upon invisible cooperation, but psychologically, however, separation often feels convincing because pain narrows attention. A wounded person naturally focuses upon personal survival. Trauma teaches vigilance. Fear teaches isolation. Disappointment teaches caution. Over time, these protective habits harden into identity. The world begins appearing hostile even when kindness quietly surrounds us. Ancient wisdom therefore invited individuals to practice another way of seeing, not naive optimism, not denial of suffering, but expanded perception. Compassion naturally emerges when we recognize shared humanity. Every person carries invisible burdens. Every stranger has known disappointment. Every family has buried someone they loved. Every human heart hopes to be understood. This recognition changes how conflict is experienced. Instead of asking, "How do I defeat this person?" the wiser question becomes, what suffering might be speaking through them? Compassion does not excuse injustice. It simply refuses to let hatred become our teacher. Non-duality, one of the oldest philosophical insights, is often misunderstood as denying differences altogether. Ancient teachers meant something subtler. Waves differ from one another, yet every wave belongs to the same ocean. Individuals remain unique, yet existence itself remains profoundly interconnected. This understanding softens pride because no achievement is entirely solitary. It also softens despair because no burden is carried completely alone. The illusion of separation dissolves gradually through everyday practice, listening instead of merely waiting to speak, offering kindness without immediate reward, recognizing another person's dignity despite disagreement, remembering that beneath differing opinions often lives the same longing for meaning, security, love, and peace. Ancient storytellers preserved the account of two neighboring villages, divided by generations of hostility. A narrow river separated them, and each believed the other responsible for every hardship. Children inherited suspicion before understanding. Merchants refused to trade. Families avoided even speaking the neighboring village's name. One year, an unusually severe drought struck both communities. The river that had divided them slowly dried until people could finally walk across its bed. There, in the exposed earth, they discovered something astonishing. Beneath the river flowed one vast underground spring, supplying water to both villages all along. Neither side had ever possessed its own source. Both had always depended upon the same hidden well. The discovery transformed generations of hostility. The river had seemed to separate them. The unseen spring had always united them. So it is with humanity. The divisions appear undeniable. Languages differ, cultures differ, beliefs differ, experiences differ. Yet beneath these visible distinctions remain the same hopes, fears, questions, joys, and longing for wholeness. The awakening journey does not erase individuality. It reveals the deeper unity from which individuality quietly arises. And once that unity is remembered, compassion no longer feels like a moral obligation. It becomes the most natural response to reality itself. Chapter 7. Ego versus True Self. There comes a quiet moment in almost every human life when an unsettling question appears. If every title were taken away, if every achievement disappeared, if every possession vanished, who would remain? Few questions are more uncomfortable, fewer are more important. From childhood onward, we slowly collect identities like garments. We become students, workers, parents, leaders, artists, citizens, successes, failures, admired people, forgotten people. Each role serves a purpose, yet something subtle begins to happen. We forget that we are wearing costumes. Eventually, we believe we are the costume itself. Ancient wisdom traditions describe this confusion as one of humanity's deepest forms of sleep. The ego is not simply pride. It is the story we continuously tell ourselves about who we think we are. Sometimes that story is flattering. Sometimes it is painfully critical. Yet both remain stories. The true self exists before either one. Imagine an actor who performs the role of a king for many years. Night after night, audiences applaud his authority, his confidence, and his majestic presence. Gradually, he begins behaving like a king even after leaving the stage. He expects special treatment. He forgets the role was temporary. The tragedy is not that he acted well. The tragedy is that he forgot he was acting. Life often unfolds in similar fashion. One person spends decades identifying entirely with success. Every promotion confirms their worth. Every accomplishment strengthens their identity. Then retirement arrives, and suddenly they no longer know who they are. Another person carries failure like an invisible chain. One painful mistake becomes the defining chapter of an otherwise beautiful life. Both have confused experience with essence. Ancient philosophers repeatedly challenged this confusion. Socrates invited relentless self-examination. The Stoics distinguished between what belongs to us and what merely passes through our lives. Hermetic teachers encouraged students to remember the divine origin beneath temporary personality. Each pointed toward the same discovery. The true self cannot be measured by circumstance. Psychologically, the ego develops for understandable reasons. Children naturally seek approval. Acceptance offers safety. Praise reinforces belonging. Gradually, we learn which behaviors earn admiration and which invite rejection. Masks become survival: the obedient mask, the successful mask, the strong mask, the humorous mask, the independent mask. Years later, we continue wearing them long after survival no longer requires them. Many adults exhaust themselves maintaining identities they secretly outgrew decades earlier. Authenticity, therefore, feels frightening. To remove the mask risks misunderstanding, yet refusing to remove it guarantees loneliness. Because no one can truly know the person hidden behind it. The true self asks for something different, not perfection, presence, not performance, honesty, not admiration, integrity. This does not mean abandoning responsibilities or pretending social roles have no value. Parents should remain parents. Teachers should continue teaching. Leaders should lead wisely. The difference lies in remembering that roles express identity. They do not create it. A compassionate teacher remains compassionate even after retirement. A wise parent remains wise after children leave home. Character survives every changing role. Ancient mystics often described awakening as remembering rather than acquiring. Nothing fundamentally new is added. Illusions gradually fall away. Like a mirror covered by years of dust, the soul does not become reflective by creating light. It becomes reflective by removing what concealed it. This inner work requires unusual courage. The ego constantly seeks certainty. The true self accepts mystery. The ego compares endlessly. The true self appreciates uniqueness. The ego demands recognition. The true self quietly serves. The ego fears loss. The true self understands that what is real cannot ultimately be taken away. An old story tells of a celebrated actor whose performances attracted crowds from every province. His fame became legendary. People bowed when he walked through marketplaces. Children memorized his speeches. One evening, after a triumphant performance, he removed his magnificent costume and looked into a polished bronze mirror backstage. For a long time he remained silent. A young apprentice entered and found him staring thoughtfully at his own reflection. "What troubles you, master?" the apprentice asked. The actor smiled gently. Tonight they applauded the king. Tomorrow they will applaud another. The apprentice looked confused. "But they were applauding you." The old man slowly folded the royal garments. "No," he whispered. "They applauded the costume." He pointed toward the simple clothing lying nearby. "My greatest task was never learning how to wear the crown. It was remembering how to remove it." When the actor eventually retired, many expected sadness. Instead, he spent his remaining years quietly teaching children, planting gardens, and caring for travelers. Those who met him later often remarked that he seemed happier than during the height of his fame. Only one student finally understood why. The old man had stopped performing. He had finally become himself, and in losing every mask, he discovered the one identity that had patiently waited beneath them all. The quiet, enduring self that neither success nor failure had ever possessed the power to define. Chapter 8. Cycles of Creation and Eternal Return. The oldest teachers rarely imagined life as a straight road leading from beginning to end. They looked instead to the forests, the rivers, the stars, and the changing seasons, and they discovered a quieter truth. Everything worthy of enduring moved in cycles. The sun disappeared each evening only to return at dawn. The moon diminished until it seemed lost, then slowly became full again. Fields that appeared lifeless in winter awakened beneath the warmth of spring. The seed surrendered its form before becoming a tree. Even human breath moved through an endless rhythm of receiving and releasing. Creation whispered the same lesson everywhere. Nothing truly alive remains motionless. Ancient wisdom invited every seeker to stop resisting these rhythms and begin learning from them. Much of human suffering, they believed, came not from change itself, but from demanding that life remain permanently comfortable, permanently successful, permanently certain. But permanence belongs only to principles. Experience belongs to movement. The Hermetic philosophers observed that the universe itself unfolds through continuous transformation. Creation is not a single event frozen in the distant past. It is an ongoing process in which every ending secretly prepares another beginning. What appears to be loss often becomes preparation. What appears to be delay often becomes formation. What appears to be failure often becomes instruction. The wise therefore stopped asking, "Why is this happening to me?" Instead, they asked, "What season am I living through?" This simple shift changes the entire landscape of the mind. No one expects spring flowers during winter. No farmer curses the earth because seeds remain invisible beneath the soil. Both understand that hidden work often precedes visible growth. Yet when human beings encounter emotional winters, they frequently conclude that growth has ended forever. Ancient teachers gently reminded them otherwise. Winter is never the whole story. Psychologically, life unfolds through recurring patterns because the human mind learns gradually rather than instantly. Certain lessons return repeatedly until they are understood. Relationships reveal familiar conflicts. Circumstances awaken familiar fears. Opportunities expose familiar doubts. At first glance, it appears as though nothing has changed. But closer observation reveals something remarkable. The lesson is the same. The learner is different. The spiral of growth resembles climbing a mountain. Looking down, one notices passing the same landmarks from higher ground. The path circles repeatedly, yet elevation steadily increases. Wisdom rarely moves in straight lines. It deepens through repetition. Ancient philosophers sometimes describe this mystery as a kind of eternal return. Not merely the repetition of external events, but the continual invitation to meet recurring experiences with greater consciousness. Anger returns. Will you respond differently? Loss returns. Will you discover deeper resilience? Success returns. Will you remain humble? The event matters less than the consciousness meeting it. Every cycle becomes another opportunity for awakening. Nature patiently demonstrates this truth. The forest does not mourn autumn leaves forever. It releases them because renewal requires space. Likewise, old beliefs sometimes must fall away before clearer understanding can emerge. Relationships change, dreams evolve, identities mature. To cling desperately to every former season is to resist life itself. Ancient wisdom encouraged surrender, not passive resignation, but intelligent cooperation with the rhythms already woven into existence. This surrender requires trust. The caterpillar cannot imagine wings while enclosed within its cocoon. The seed cannot foresee the branches hidden inside its small shell. The child cannot fully comprehend the adult waiting silently within years yet to come. Transformation often begins where certainty ends. This truth also softens pride. Periods of success need not produce arrogance, because every summer eventually gives way to autumn. Likewise, hardship need not produce despair, because winter quietly carries the promise of spring. Nothing remains unchanged forever. The person who understands cycles develops remarkable steadiness. They celebrate abundance without becoming attached. They endure hardship without surrendering hope. They recognize both as temporary visitors. Their peace rests not upon passing seasons, but upon the enduring principles beneath them. Ancient civilizations built many of their festivals around these recurring rhythms. Harvest celebrations honored gratitude after labor. New Year ceremonies symbolized renewal. Solstices reminded communities that even the longest night eventually surrendered to dawn. These traditions were not mere rituals, they were reminders. Life renews itself, so can the human spirit. One ancient story tells of an elderly olive farmer whose orchard had nourished generations. A terrible fire swept through the hills one summer, reducing nearly every tree to blackened trunks. His neighbors wept openly. Many abandoned their land, convinced everything had ended. The old farmer quietly gathered his family and began clearing the ashes. A young grandson asked why he continued working when nothing remained. The old man knelt beside one charred tree and gently brushed away the burned bark. "Watch carefully," he said. Weeks later, tiny green shoots emerged from the blackened trunk. Months later, new branches stretched toward the sky. Years later, the orchard once again produced fruit. Visitors marveled at its beauty, never realizing that many of its strongest trees had once appeared completely dead. Whenever travelers asked the old farmer the secret of his perseverance, he simply smiled. "I did not place my faith in the season," he replied. "I placed it in the life hidden beneath it." So it is with every awakened soul. The cycles continue, the seasons change, loss gives way to renewal, and beneath every ending quietly waits another beginning, patiently inviting us to grow wiser than before. Chapter 9: Fear, Wisdom, and the Journey Home. Every great story ever told begins with an ordinary life interrupted. A quiet shepherd hears an unexpected calling. A reluctant prince leaves the safety of his palace. A traveler steps beyond familiar roads. A humble fisherman sails into unknown waters. At the beginning, none of them feels prepared. Each carries uncertainty. Each faces fear. Yet without that first trembling step, no transformation would ever occur. Ancient storytellers understood something modern minds often forget. Fear is rarely the enemy of awakening. More often, it is the doorway. Throughout history, the hero's journey has mirrored the hidden journey taking place inside every human being. The dragons, deserts, storms, and mountains appearing in legendary tales symbolize the inner obstacles each person must eventually confront. The dragon may be pride, the desert may be loneliness, the storm may be grief, the mountain may be self-doubt. The battle always appears external. Its deepest victory is inward. Fear performs an important psychological function. It protects life from genuine danger. Without it, survival would become impossible. Yet fear also possesses another tendency. It exaggerates. It imagines disasters that never arrive. It mistakes unfamiliarity for threat. It persuades us that remaining unchanged is safer than growing. Ancient wisdom, therefore, never encouraged reckless courage. It encouraged conscious courage. The difference is profound. Recklessness ignores fear. Wisdom walks with it. The Stoics repeatedly taught that courage is not the absence of anxiety, but the decision that truth matters more than comfort. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that difficulty belongs naturally to human existence. Epictetus encouraged students to distinguish between what they could govern and what they could not. The hero first masters himself. Only then can he face the world. Ancient myths preserved this pattern repeatedly because it reflected universal psychology. Odysseus wandered for years before returning home, yet his longest journey was not across the sea. It was through pride, temptation, grief, patience, and wisdom. The Buddha left the palace seeking freedom from suffering, only to discover that the deepest prison existed within the human mind. Socrates accepted death rather than abandon truth, because he believed integrity mattered more than survival itself. Each story speaks differently. Each points toward the same destination. The journey home begins inside. Transformation always asks for sacrifice. Old certainties disappear. Former identities dissolve. Comfortable illusions collapse. The ego interprets these losses as catastrophe. Wisdom recognizes them as initiation. Many people spend years waiting until fear disappears before acting. Ancient teachers suggested another approach. Take the next truthful step while fear remains present. Courage grows through practice. Like a muscle strengthened by repeated effort, it develops only through use. One honest conversation, one forgiven resentment, one meaningful risk, one faithful decision. These small acts quietly reshape character. Eventually, the person discovers that courage was never suddenly granted. It was patiently cultivated. Psychologically, every meaningful transformation involves crossing invisible thresholds. The first threshold is admitting dissatisfaction. The second is questioning old assumptions. The third is acting differently, despite uncertainty. Beyond these thresholds waits another version of oneself, not a perfect person, a freer one. This explains why fear often intensifies immediately before important change. The familiar identity senses its own approaching transformation. Habit resists. Comfort argues. Doubt becomes unusually persuasive. The traveler stands between two worlds. One is familiar but limiting. The other is uncertain but alive. This is the sacred tension of awakening. Ancient philosophers understood that wisdom cannot simply be transferred like information from one mind to another. It must be embodied through experience. No teacher can walk another person's path. No book can substitute for courage. Every individual eventually reaches the place where knowledge must become action. Only then does understanding mature into wisdom. The true journey home, therefore, is not geographical. It is existential. It is the gradual return from fear toward trust, from fragmentation toward wholeness, from performance toward authenticity, from forgetfulness toward remembrance. The destination has always existed. Only the traveler needed to awaken. An old story tells of a young messenger sent across a dangerous mountain pass to deliver an important scroll. Villagers warned him of wolves, storms, cliffs, and thieves. The journey seemed impossible. Terrified, he sought advice from an elderly guide who had crossed those mountains countless times. "What removes fear?" the young man asked. The old traveler shook his head. "Nothing removes it." Seeing the young man's disappointment, he continued, "But every step teaches it where its proper place belongs." Together they began climbing. The youth trembled, crossing narrow ridges. He stumbled through storms. He lost his way more than once. Yet with every challenge, something unexpected happened. The mountains remained the same. He changed. When they finally reached the summit, the guide pointed toward the vast valleys stretching beyond the horizon. "Look behind you." The young messenger turned. The path that had once appeared terrifying now seemed almost beautiful. Not because danger had disappeared, because he had become larger than the fear that once ruled him. Years later, he himself guided younger travelers across those same mountains. Whenever frightened apprentices asked how to become fearless, he smiled with the quiet understanding of one who had already made the journey. "You are asking the wrong question," he would say. The goal is not to escape fear. The goal is to remember who continues walking even when fear speaks. And perhaps that has always been the deepest purpose of every ancient hero's story. Not to teach us how extraordinary heroes become, but to remind ordinary people that the journey home begins the moment they choose wisdom over fear, truth over illusion, and the quiet voice of the soul over the endless noise of doubt. Chapter 10. Living according to the law of one. Many people imagine that spiritual wisdom belongs only in temples, monasteries, or moments of meditation. Ancient teachers insisted upon something far more demanding. They taught that truth must eventually appear in conversations, relationships, workplaces, families, and even the smallest daily decisions. A principle that cannot be lived is only an idea. Wisdom becomes real only when it quietly transforms behavior. The law of one begins with a simple recognition. Although each human being appears separate, every action enters an invisible web connecting countless other lives. A harsh word spoken in anger rarely ends with the person who hears it. It travels. Pain often becomes pain. Likewise, one sincere act of kindness rarely stops with a single recipient. It also travels. Compassion multiplies quietly. Ancient philosophers understood that humanity resembles a living body. The hand cannot truly declare independence from the heart. The eye cannot flourish while ignoring the health of the whole. Every part depends upon every other. The Stoics described humanity as citizens of one universal community. Hermetic thinkers spoke of one living intelligence expressing itself through countless forms. Other ancient traditions expressed the same insight through different language. Life is sustained through relationship rather than isolation. This realization transforms relationships. Instead of asking, "How can I win?" a wiser question appears. How can we both grow? Conflict changes. Competition softens. Listening becomes more valuable than proving oneself correct. The awakened individual understands that every relationship becomes a classroom where character is quietly refined. The impatient spouse teaches patience. The difficult colleague teaches emotional mastery. The grateful friend teaches appreciation. Even those who oppose us often reveal the places where pride still hides within us. Every encounter carries instruction. This perspective also transforms work. Many people see employment merely as survival or personal advancement. Ancient wisdom offered a broader vision. Work is participation in creation. The carpenter shaping wood, the teacher shaping minds, the physician restoring health, the farmer cultivating fields. All become collaborators in sustaining life itself. Purpose dignifies labor. The smallest task performed with integrity becomes sacred. A floor swept honestly carries more hidden nobility than a throne occupied dishonorably. Dorfeis naturally follows. The law of one reminds us that no gift matures through possession alone. Knowledge grows by sharing. Wisdom deepens through teaching. Strength expands through protecting others. Resources multiply through responsible stewardship. The greatest lives are remembered not because they accumulated the most, but because they contributed the most. Ancient elders often measured wealth differently, not by what a person owned, by what remained better because they had lived. Compassion becomes another practical expression of unity. Compassion does not require agreement, it requires understanding. When we remember that every individual carries unseen burdens, judgment begins giving way to curiosity. The angry stranger may be grieving. The fearful neighbor may have known betrayal. the proud leader may secretly feel inadequate. Seeing beyond appearances softens the heart without weakening discernment. Compassion becomes strength guided by wisdom. Integrity then binds everything together. Without integrity, even noble ideas eventually collapse. Integrity means the private life and the public life gradually become one. The same honesty, the same kindness, the same principles, whether anyone is watching or not. Ancient teachers repeatedly insisted that character is what remains after reputation disappears. Reputation depends upon other people's opinions. Character depends upon daily choices. One changes constantly, the other quietly shapes destiny. Living according to the law of one, therefore, requires continual remembrance. Every morning becomes an opportunity to ask, how shall I contribute today? Whom can I encourage? What truth requires courage? Where can I replace judgment with understanding? Which action reflects the person I wish to become? These questions gradually transform ordinary existence into conscious living. Nothing spectacular may happen immediately, yet invisible changes accumulate. Like water shaping stone, consistent actions slowly reshape the soul. Ancient storytellers preserved the account of an elderly bridge builder who spent decades maintaining a wooden crossing connecting two villages separated by a swift river. Travelers rarely thanked him. Merchants hurried past. Children scarcely noticed his quiet labor. Each morning he repaired broken planks, strengthened weakened beams, and cleared fallen branches. One severe winter flood destroyed much of the bridge. Villagers questioned whether rebuilding it remained worthwhile. The old craftsman simply smiled. If the bridge disappears, he said, the river grows larger than the people. For months he worked patiently until the crossing stood once again. Years later, after his death, an inscription was discovered carved beneath one hidden beam where few would ever look. It read, "The purpose of a bridge is never itself. It exists so others may safely cross." The villagers suddenly understood why strangers remembered the old builder with such affection. He had not merely repaired wood, he had quietly united lives. So it is with every awakened human being. The law of one is not fulfilled through extraordinary visions alone. It is fulfilled whenever a person becomes a bridge instead of another wall, a source of healing instead of division, and a quiet reminder that beneath our many differences flows one shared humanity. Chapter 11. The Law of Creation in Everyday Life. The greatest transformations rarely announce themselves with thunder. They begin as almost invisible habits repeated patiently until they reshape an entire life. Ancient wisdom consistently taught that every visible effect begins with unseen causes. Long before a harvest appears, a seed has already entered the earth. Before a monument rises toward the sky, someone has imagined it. Before character becomes visible, thousands of hidden decisions have quietly prepared it. Life is always being created. The only question is whether we participate consciously or unconsciously. Every morning begins this creative process anew. Before speaking a single word, the mind has already begun selecting its direction. Will attention settle upon gratitude or complaint? Will it nourish courage or rehearse fear? Will it seek truth or distraction? Creation begins long before action becomes visible. Attention is the first tool of the Creator. Whatever continually receives attention gradually shapes experience. A mind constantly occupied by resentment eventually discovers reasons to remain resentful. A mind trained toward gratitude begins recognizing opportunities that previously passed unnoticed. Attention is like sunlight in a garden. Whatever receives it grows. Ancient philosophers therefore guarded attention with remarkable discipline. They knew scattered attention produces scattered living. Focused attention produces meaningful creation. Speech follows attention. Words appear ordinary because they leave no physical footprint. Yet few forces shape human relationships more profoundly. One sentence spoken carelessly can wound for decades. One sincere word of encouragement can alter another person's future. Ancient traditions consistently urged restraint before speech because language possesses creative influence. Words first shape the speaker, then they shape the listener. Speaking truthfully strengthens integrity. Speaking kindly strengthens compassion. Speaking wisely strengthens community. Speech becomes architecture. Habits quietly reinforce both attention and speech. Many imagine destiny arriving through extraordinary moments. Ancient teachers often smiled at this assumption. Destiny usually arrives disguised as routine. The person who chooses patience every day eventually becomes patient. The individual practicing generosity repeatedly becomes generous, almost without effort. Character grows through repetition. The smallest habit repeated faithfully eventually outweighs the grandest intention repeatedly postponed. Gratitude occupies a special place within the law of creation because it changes perception before circumstances necessarily change. A grateful farmer still works hard. A grateful teacher still faces challenges. A grateful parent still encounters uncertainty. Gratitude does not deny difficulty. It refuses to allow difficulty to become the entire story. This shift in perception influences every future decision. Hope replaces despair. Possibility replaces resignation. Creation expands. Responsibility also belongs to this law. Many people wait for ideal conditions before beginning meaningful change. Ancient wisdom suggests another path. Co-wait faithfully with what already exists. One thoughtful conversation, one honest apology, one disciplined hour, one compassionate decision. The smallest conscious act begins redirecting an entire life. Invisible causes slowly gather visible consequences. This understanding removes both arrogance and helplessness. We cannot instantly control every outcome. Neither are we powerless. Between those extremes lies responsibility. The awakened individual recognizes that each thought entertained, each word spoken, and each action chosen quietly participates in creating tomorrow. Life becomes less accidental, more intentional. Ancient philosophers often compared human beings to gardeners rather than gamblers. Gardeners understand timing, preparation, consistency, patience. No wise gardener digs up seeds each morning to measure progress. They simply continue tending the soil. Growth arrives in its proper season. The same principle governs inner life. Many abandon meaningful practices because dramatic results fail to appear immediately. Yet transformation rarely announces itself day by day. It reveals itself year by year. The fearful person gradually notices greater courage. The impatient person discovers unusual calm. The distracted mind slowly develops clarity. Creation has been working quietly all along. An old story tells of a humble potter whose vessels became renowned throughout distant kingdoms. Travelers assumed he possessed rare talent or hidden techniques. One curious apprentice eventually asked him how he created such extraordinary work. The old craftsman handed him a lump of clay. "Tomorrow," he said, "shape it again." The apprentice obeyed. The following day the master gave the same instruction. Again and again this continued. Growing frustrated, the young student protested. "When will you teach me the secret?" The potter gently placed one finished vessel beside the untouched clay. "There is no secret. There is only faithful shaping." He pointed toward hundreds of completed pots lining the workshop. Each one was created long before the final touch. It was created every ordinary day. I refused to neglect small improvements. Years later, the apprentice became a respected craftsman himself. Whenever visitors admired his work, they expected mysterious explanations. Instead, he repeated the words of his old teacher. "Creation is never sudden, it is daily." Perhaps this is the deepest lesson the law of creation offers every human soul. Our lives are not shaped only by extraordinary moments, but by ordinary moments honored with extraordinary awareness. Every habit plants a seed. Every thought waters something. Every word builds or weakens. Every grateful heart prepares richer soil. Invisible causes patiently become visible effects, and day by day, whether consciously or unconsciously, each of us is creating the life we will one day inhabit. Chapter 12. Final Revelation. You were never separate. The separation humanity fears most is often not separation from the universe. It is separation from its own deepest nature. Throughout this journey, we have explored the laws of creation, the illusion of division, the rhythms of life, the prison of identity, the hidden architecture of consciousness, and the silent wisdom carried by ancient civilizations. At first, these teachings may have seemed like separate ideas, each standing alone. Now they reveal themselves as pieces of one greater pattern. Every chapter has quietly pointed toward the same destination, not somewhere beyond the horizon, not hidden inside a forgotten temple, not waiting at the end of life, but within the awareness, reading these words at this very moment. Ancient teachers often compared awakening to a man searching desperately for a treasure while carrying it in his own pocket. His suffering did not come from lacking treasure. It came from forgetting where it had always been. The divine spark has never demanded that you become someone else. It asks only that you remember who you have always been beneath fear, titles, disappointments, ambitions, and borrowed identities. Psychologically, this changes everything. Many people spend their lives trying to manufacture worth through achievement. They seek endless approval because they secretly believe something essential is missing within them. Every success brings temporary relief before another emptiness appears. Ancient wisdom offered a radically different foundation. Worth is not manufactured, it is remembered. Character may grow, wisdom may deepen, understanding may expand, but the deepest dignity of being human does not arrive through possession or recognition. It precedes both. When this truth begins to settle into the heart, competition slowly gives way to contribution. Fear softens into trust. Comparison loses its power. The desperate need to prove oneself gradually dissolves because identity no longer depends upon external applause. This is not passivity. It is freedom. The awakened individual still works diligently, still creates, still serves, still dreams. But these actions arise from fullness rather than deficiency. Life becomes expression instead of compensation. This is why so many ancient masters appeared quietly joyful, despite possessing few worldly advantages. Their peace was rooted in participation rather than possession. They experienced themselves not as isolated fragments struggling against existence, but as conscious participants within a living whole. Returning home, therefore, does not require traveling across the world. It requires seeing differently. The home you seek is not a destination. It is a way of perceiving. The moment you recognize the sacred within ordinary existence, home begins appearing everywhere. A conversation becomes sacred. Work becomes sacred. Silence becomes sacred. Even difficulty becomes sacred, because it now participates in your awakening rather than opposing it. Every challenge becomes another teacher. Every relationship becomes another mirror. Every sunrise becomes another reminder. The universe has never stopped speaking. We simply learn again how to listen. An ancient story tells of an old pilgrim who spent 40 years searching for the legendary Temple of Light. He crossed mountains, sailed dangerous seas, studied under famous teachers, and visited sacred cities known throughout the ancient world. His hair turned white, his body grew weary. Still he searched. Finally, exhausted and disappointed, he returned to the small village where he had been born. Sitting beneath the old olive tree that had shaded his childhood, he closed his eyes in silence. For the first time in decades, he stopped searching. The wind moved gently through the branches, birds sang above him, children laughed in the distance. In that stillness, something unexpected happened. The peace he had sought in distant lands quietly arose within him. His old teacher, now very elderly, happened to pass by and smiled knowingly. "So," the teacher said softly, "you have finally arrived." The pilgrim looked around in confusion. "But this is where I began." The teacher nodded. "Exactly. You needed the journey to discover that what you sought had never left." That story has survived for generations because it describes every human awakening. The journey matters. The seeking matters. The questions matter. Yet, in the end, the greatest revelation is astonishingly simple. You were never searching for another world. You were remembering the deepest truth about this one. You were never searching for another self. You were uncovering the one hidden beneath every mask. You were never abandoned by the source of life. You had only forgotten your participation in it. So let this be the final invitation. Walk gently. Observe deeply. Quate wisely. Serve generously. Love courageously. Remember daily, not because these practices make you worthy, but because they help you remember the unity that has always existed beneath every appearance of separation. For the law of one has never been merely a philosophy. It is a way of seeing, a way of living, a way of becoming. And perhaps the greatest secret ever preserved by the ancient sages is this: you did not come into the universe as something separate. You came as one unique expression of the same living mystery that moves the stars, grows the forests, shapes the mountains, and quietly breathes through every human heart. You were never separate. You only forgot. And every moment of conscious living is the beautiful act of remembering once again. Conclusion.